Have you ever been caught in the rut of always talking a big game, but never getting things done? How about a lofty goal that you want to go after, but never achieved? Or maybe a regret because you never tried to achieve a dream because you were too afraid. Sometimes it might be as simple as the father or mother who just survives and not interact with their kids. Most excuses is, we just don't have the time. But in reality, it is the lack of drive. Hello everyone. Today's episode is about drive, the essential element that helps us get things done to achieve the great things. We will discuss where does drive come from, what causes us not to have drive, and how to overcome the lack of drive. The topic of drive will be a two-part series, the first being lack of drive, that's today's session, and second being too much drive. So let's stop the regretting and start achieving the holy success God is calling you.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins with a lunch with one of my employees. You know, as a business owner, people come and go in my business, and I'm always proud when people actually leave my business with learning a lot. So I mentor a lot of my employees, and I would say probably about half of them are college graduates that come out. And I have a lengthy mentoring program, and I continue to mentor them even after years. So there's one employee, she had been working for me for about 5 years. She came from China. So she had done her undergraduates in China, and she did her master's here in the U.S., and her first job was working for me. And we were at this lunch because I always take out the person for lunch before they leave. It was a one-on-one conversation, and she shared with me a couple of things. One was that she was open and said that she was a very spoiled kid. You know, with China, with their one-child policy, she was an only child in China, and so she was really babied and coddled. And she wasn't afraid of even saying that. I mean, she even said when she went when she was a freshman in college, she never did her laundry. She would just come home every weekend and have her mom do the laundry. She was babied so much that when she grew up, all the way through high school pretty much, her mom had all her clothes out. She would have the toothpaste ready for her to brush her teeth. Everything was laid out for her, that all she had to do really was just to wash and brush. And then her mom would clean everything up, and that's how it went. So when she went to college, she said she really didn't like college because there were things that she had to do which she didn't want to do. But there was a life-altering experience that she had. She met one of her friends, and you know, one of the things that she admitted was that when she went to high school, she really acted like a robot. Like she just did what she was told and just kind of went with the program, and she just barely did everything, all right? She never put thought into anything. She just acted like a robot. She then said that when she met her best friend in college, there was something about her. And that one thing that she noticed was that whatever she put her mind to, she achieved. She went after it. She mastered her life. That's what she noticed about her friend, that she mastered her life and that she was able to get things done. And then she related to me that, you know, unlike, you know, animals, human beings have the ability to actually control their lives and their destiny and to determine their fate. Okay? So in Asia, they talk about fate, you know, and that's the truth. You know, human beings can control their fate because God has given us a will. And so she continued to talk about this and how it changed how she became. That she then became aware that I can do things purposefully and I can drive purposefully for that reason. And because of that one paradigm shift, she was able to come to America because she always wanted to come to America. She remembers watching, I believe, a cartoon she was explaining and that cartoon. Homer Simpson. It was the Homer Simpson cartoon, and she really was amazed at how this cartoon could make fun of, people without getting in, and even presidents and politics and everything else. And she was mesmerized about how people could just be themselves and be made fun of and not take it too seriously. In China, that's not how it goes. So she was very, very mesmerized. So she wanted to come to America, and she put her will and intellect towards that. Her grades got better. She applied for college here in the U.S., which is not an easy task to do. She came to America, and out of the 2 years to get her master's, she rarely saw her parents. And then she wanted to stay in America, and so she applied for my job. Now, I was pretty amazed with her because she went to University of Florida, I believe, for her master's. And when we hired her, the next week, she drove all the way from Florida to start her job. Very, very aggressive and very pretty much a doer of doers, I would call her. And then she proceeded to talk about other parts of the job that helped her grow. One of the things that she was always was afraid. She didn't know how she was going to work out and fear. And I remember working with her through her fears, of the new job, of the new experience, of the ambiguity. And by having that mentoring her, she was able to succeed in that project. Later on, she, went to another project where she learned how to handle what we would call fluidity. All right. That sometimes you don't really need to know everything to get the job done. So there were a lot of great experiences, and she's sharing this with me. And I got to be honest with you, I was pretty proud of myself and proud of her, almost like a father-daughter relationship, in realizing how she grew in those 5 years working for my company. And she teared up and everything, and she thanked me for all the great experiences and how she grew immensely, and I believe she's working right now for Amazon. So for me, it's a sorry loss that she left because she was a great employee, but in other ways, it was a great success story. And and I'm kind of proud because I was her mentor that made her grow into the woman that she is now. So I pray for her, and hopefully she'll do a great job at Amazon out in Seattle. So with that said, today's topic is about drive. Where does it come from, and why do we need it? Okay, drive is, if you were to poll or take a statistics of all the great saints throughout the whole, time, you would understand. I don't care if they were cloistered or if they were martyrs or if they were, great religious starters of religious orders. They have one thing in common, and that one thing in common is drive. That's what it is. That single quality is drive. Drive because it gets it done. Okay, you can't become holy if you're not going to drive. You can't be a holy success if you're not going to drive and get things done. So all the great saints had this one thing, and that is drive. And that one thing, drive, is also what makes a person successful, believe it or not. Because you can't be successful if you don't drive. If you really want something, you got to drive and get towards it. Okay? This is the single most quality that I also mention when new employees come in. I said, you need to drive. You need to take that ownership and drive it to completion. So, now, what else do we need drive for? We use drive for networking. It's the energy to get things done. We need drive to get things become holy. So I want to talk about maybe Abraham. Look at the amazing saints, okay? Look at Abraham. Abraham was 75 years old when he was called to the land of Chaldea to go to Palestine, right? Now, he's 75 years old. Most people are retired by 75. Priests can retire at 75. In fact, that's a mandatory requirement. Yeah, at 75, that's when God calls Abraham. And he calls him to do what? To go to A vacation? No. He goes to the location and there's a famine. After the famine, he's at war. He fights several wars, okay? Then at 86, he has his first child, Ishmael. At 89, he has his second child, Isaac, okay? Now, again, this would be the time when we're definitely in retirement. Now, and over 90 years old is when he sacrifices Isaac, okay? Not physically, but, where he was told to go sacrifice Isaac. So think about that, okay? So God calls us at any time, and when we're called, we have to answer that call in action. And action means to drive, okay? Look at St. Francis and all the great things he did, okay? Rebuilding the church at that time. So we need to have drive. This is how important it is to have drive, to become holy as well as successful, right? So what we're going to do is, what are the lack of drive which impacts our work and family and spirituality? Well, first of all, look at work. If we don't have drive at work, then in essence, we're just dreamers. And the chances are we're going to get fired. Okay? If you want to be an entrepreneur and you don't have drive, then, you're just a dreamer pretty much. How about family? How about, how often do we, plan a trip and all of a sudden the trip goes awry and nothing happens? So we have to understand that, drive is needed in our family. It's needed also in spirituality. All right? You can read all the spiritual books you want. You can, discuss all the spiritual things that you want and feel all warm and fuzzy and think you're all holy. But that's only your thinking that you're holy. It's not until you actually go and do things, that you're doing your prayers, that you are meditating, that you are going to confession, that you are going to, to the Holy Eucharist, or you are going to adoration. So it's a doing, in that you are helping other people out, okay? But if we're not doing that, then all it is just a spiritual ideology. That's all it is. It's just an intellectual thing. And so holiness is a doing, and the way that we do it is through drive. So, the lack of drive, sometimes we call it laziness. A lot of times people think that people are lazy. And, I've hired a lot of people, and I agree, some people are just lazy, but I think that's very rare. I think a lot of times that it's not laziness. It's just that it's actually ignorance. That most of the lack of drive comes from not knowing how to drive and fear. They're the two things that usually happens. So when I mentor people, it's usually those two categories that I always focus on: fear and how do you drive? What are the things that come from? So we're going to discuss the lack of drive and how it is brought about. Okay, what causes the lack of drive? All right, because I'm a firm believer in once you know where the problem comes from, you then can take some remedies to cure it. So the three enemies of the soul, we'll always talk about that when something bad happens to us. Okay. All right. The first enemy, the three enemies of the souls are the world, the devil, and the self. So let's first talk about the world and what does the world do? Okay. Well, generally speaking, the world gives us false ideas and worldly pleasures. That's pretty much the theme between the world, right? False ideas and worldly pleasures, okay, when it comes to drive. What are these false ideas first? The first false idea is overemphasizing the system. All right. So many times we overemphasize the system. Okay. I mentioned in other episodes, I sometimes help out business people and how they run their business. And I don't know how many times people are like, well, if I just build this system, this should work. Whether it's a social media Shopify account, whether it's retail business, whatever it is, they think if you build the system, it will work all honky dory. I build systems all the time. That's what my job is as an IT consulting firm. We build systems, and I can guarantee you 100% that is not the case. You build a system, no system is perfect. Okay. In fact, there's usually about anywhere from 20% failure rate on the system. If you're doing 20%, that's okay in a system. So that means there's a lot of degree of error that occurs. All right. So a good example of this is look at Planet Fitness. I'm going to use that. Planet Fitness has a very good system for you to get healthy. But why aren't people going to the gym? In fact, Planet Fitness actually knows that you're not going to go to the gym. That's why they only charge $10, because they know for every person who's actually going to physically work, there's going to be probably about 7 other people who won't. Think about this. Only 20% of a gym, okay, members of a gym will actually exercise. That means for every 100 members, only 20 of them are actually going to use the gym. Think about that, okay? And that's what they're banking on. They're banking on the fact that you're not going to exercise, okay? Even though there's a great system. So what we do is we tell a doctor, well, I joined Planet Fitness, so I must be getting, I minimize that guilt treatment that I'm not being healthy. But in reality, you got to do it. You have to literally drive to the Planet Fitness and get exercise, okay? The other is college. College systematizes everything, right? And I'm not saying college is bad or evil. That's not the case. But part of college is that we sometimes, fall into the trap of that this is the system that's going to make us succeed. And that is not the case at all, okay? In fact, a great entrepreneur magazine would say that the average GPA of millionaires is a 2.9. Why? Because they can adjust to the outside world better than a person who actually gets a 4.0 or higher, if that's possible, because they just know how to work the system. That's what it is. And they don't know how to not work the system, okay? So the point I'm getting at is, when we overemphasize the system, there is an inability or ability to actually work in a fluid and ambiguous world diminishes, okay? And the world is ambiguous and the world is fluid. And that's actually a good thing, believe it or not. But that's what it is, okay? So we have to kind of get this idea of systems, okay? Now, I'm not saying that systems are bad. Systems can enhance, okay, and help out. But when we use systems to think that that's the panacea to all the solutions, then that is really the big issue. A classic example of that is socialism. Socialism is based on the idea that the system's going to take care of you, okay? But the problem with socialism is not that the system is bad. In fact, if you look at socialism just generally speaking, it's actually a good thing. I mean, who doesn't want to provide healthcare for free and all these other things that happen, and who wants to, abuse other people and everything else? The problem with socialism is that it relies on the system, okay, but it neglects original sin, okay? The scars of original sin that will eventually, those people will actually abuse the system. That's what it neglects, okay? So life is not just about a system, because life has people around it, and people are unpredictable. People have original sin. People will sometimes do good or evil unexpectedly, okay? So you cannot live on that way, and most people, because of original sin, will just let their passions go through and become lazy. So that's one. The other is this over-reliance on certifications. We've gotten away from what I would call common sense, okay, and under what we would call certification, whether it's a CPA, whether it's a PMP. I face this all day because I'm I'm in IT consulting, which relies on certifications. And these certifications are so blown out of proportion because most people who get certifications really don't even know what they're doing. Okay? They really, really don't, because they lack experience or because they lack drive. I've hired many people who have certifications. They're good at taking tests, but they have zero experience and they have zero drive. Okay, they have zero experience because they have zero drive. Okay, and no one wants to hire them. So just having a degree might get you in front of the door, but if you don't have drive, you're going to be fired very quickly. Okay, that's what's going to happen, and that's exactly what happens to a lot of people who come out of college with good grades. Mainly is that they don't know how to adjust to real life, ambiguous, fluid situations, and because of that, they lack the drive, and then fear sets in. So the other is too much information. There's a lot of information out there. And so the problem with TMI, which is too much information, is that it's not about information. It's about wisdom. And wisdom and knowledge, okay? Wisdom is basically knowledge infused with experience, okay? How many times do our kids know more than we do, like knowledge-wise, but they lack wisdom? They don't know how to use it, okay? They don't know how to use the knowledge that's given through Google or wherever it is, okay? Not only is this knowledge, diminishing wisdom, but it's also hurting where we can get wisdom. Wisdom comes from older people and traditions. Why? Because traditions and older people have experienced. Life is repetitive at the end of the day. Okay? If you zoom out, technology is different and all that other stuff, but at the end of the day, whether we had to walk in the olden days, take a chariot in the medium days, or nowadays take a car, or in the future take a hoverboard or something weird, we still have to go from point A to point B. That's what we got to do. And wisdom shows us that what is the best way of doing that and how to do that, okay? So, if we zoom out, where do we really, really, really get wisdom, which is what we really need? Through tradition, infusing knowledge, modern-day knowledge, with the experience. And that experience comes through tradition, and it comes from older people. I love talking to older people because the wisdom that they have is tremendous. All right. So that's one thing that too much information brings. Okay. The other thing that too much information brings is over analysis. It brings fear. Okay. As I mentioned before, I remember one time I hurt my arm, and all of a sudden, when I Googled what could be possibly wrong with my shoulder, at first I thought I was going to die of cancer. Because it was like cancer, I'm dying of cancer, I'm dying of a heart disease, all this thing, and all it wound up being is basically an achy shoulder, okay? So too much information causes fear, and it causes paralysis. Too many options causes paralysis. What's the best one, right? When sometimes just doing it, okay, and doing it and then learning through that experience to say maybe I should go a different way is better than just totally being paralyzed because there's too many options, okay? So that's what too much information brings, all right? The other is a lot of people confuse what I would call desire versus want, all right? Desire versus want. And so the world confuses us with that in a sense of that, just because someone desires to be a rock star, if they truly don't want it, then they're not going to practice. They're not going to do all the things that are necessary, the sacrifices to achieve it. Okay? So they confuse desire to want. All right? The other and last is pleasure. The world gives us a lot of pleasures, such as TV, social media, comfort, luxuries, all these things, especially in America, in a first world country where, we have these pleasures, and because we have these pleasures, our body gets used to them. And that's what causes us to be, in essence, lazy. All right? So those are what I can sum up, basically. So it's basically giving us some false ideological thoughts, okay, as well as worldly pleasures, all right? That makes us kind of lazy in essence. The next enemy is the devil. The devil the main thing that devil does, is zooming out here, is it tempts us with false ideas and behaviors and pleasure. So what it does is it basically takes the worldly ideas, the false ideas and the pleasures, and it tempts us. Okay? So remember, one thing about the rule of the devils is that the devils can't tempt you with things that you're not experienced with. This is so important to understand. The devil cannot tempt you with something that you have never seen or experienced. Okay? They can't. All right? They can only tempt you with things that are in your memory. That's why holy innocence is very, very important. Holy ignorance, that's what I call it. To be ignorant sometimes is great. They say knowledge is power. Well, actually, I would say conversely, ignorance is holiness. Okay? So the more we can be ignorant about things, in many ways, it's better. Okay? That's why I try not to watch the news. I don't watch television. There's lots of things that I don't watch or listen to because I want to be wholly ignorant. So what does Satan do? He takes those worldly ideas and experiences and he tempts us with them. Okay? The biggest thing that he tempts us with is those pleasures. Okay? The social media, the TV, the luxury. Satan will say things like, why do you need to do this? You can just lay down and go to sleep. Or, just, you don't need to do your prayers, just watch some more television. Or, this is too difficult for you, right? So just take it easy. You don't need to do that. These are things that always happen, all right? So that's how Satan tempts us. Now, with pleasure, how does he tempt us with false ideas? Mainly is FUD, okay? It's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. A lot of times, he throws a lot of fear into our minds. So he'll take that information, the TMI information, and he'll cause you paralysis. He'll say things like, "Oh, this is better, and that's better," and then everything else, or he says, things like, "Oh, you're not even prepared. You don't know what to do, and because you're not prepared, you won't be able to do it." And then we spend all of our time over and over and over again trying to figure out what's the best possible solution or know it to the T. You see, my employee ran into that, the one that had left, the story that I began with. She wanted to know everything before she started things. But later on, she understood that she was actually afraid. That's why. But that she didn't need to know everything. That she only needed to know a certain amount and then just get it done. So this is this fear, okay? Uncertainty, where it's so much research, oh, this might not, do it. I was talking to a woman who wanted to start her own gym. And she just talked and said, yeah, this, and that. I always wanted to do it. And so my friend said, why don't you do it now? And she said, oh, I can't, And that was a long time ago. Now, she's going to get married. And once she gets married, it's going to even be more difficult. So it would have been easier several years ago when we had that conversation to say, this is when, you should have started. So the point I'm getting at is Satan is going to throw a lot of fear at you. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Doubt your capabilities. Oh, you can't do that. You don't have the funds for that. Okay? If I had to worry about all those fear factors, I would have never started the business. Now, that doesn't mean that we should take rash decisions and jump. The biggest thing that we can do is learn how to discern. And the Catholic Church has a discernment process. And that process isn't just for vocations. We have this idea that discernment is only for vocations. But discernment comes in many places to make those key important decisions, okay? Because the Catholic Church knows that, sometimes it might be the devil, it might be the world, it might be ourselves that are forcing us to make a decision that might not be what God wills us to do, okay? So learning to discern is really important, okay? So the last enemy of the soul is the hardest, which is yourself. Okay? And what you're going to battle mostly is the two areas. The one is controlling our passions. Okay? That's one. And then the other is controlling our pleasure through our external senses. Okay? So we're going to discuss that even more, okay? Because that's really the main topic. Because drive comes from our passions, okay? That's where it comes from. Our drive comes from our passions. I call the passions the engine of our soul. That's what it is. When the rubber meets the road, that engine is the passions, okay? So the three enemies of the souls, I'm going to give it a simple example, okay? Because remember that these three enemies of the souls don't kind of work in separate circles. They actually work hand in hand to punch you out. I call it the 1-2 punch. Okay, the 1-2 punch in boxing is he jabs with if you're right-handed, they'll jab with the left hand, one jab to kind of get you off guard a little bit, and then you swing real heavily on your right arm. Okay, your right fist. So it's called the 1-2 punch. And the 1-2 punch is the world jabs us to confuse, to kind of, get us mesmerized. And then Satan punches us with the temptations to basically knock the self, okay? And that's what he does. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, you're supposed to do your prayers, all right? I'm required to do evening prayers all the time. So I do a prayer. And I'm supposed to do this prayer at, let's say I do it at 10 o'clock at night, and that's when I'm supposed to do it. But now there's a television there, and I'm mesmerized with the television, right? Instead of, there's a TV, I'm watching it, it triggers the idea that I want to watch the television. So then the devil whispers in my ear, and he says, what's a little half-hour show going to do, right? You can do your liturgy of the hours at 10:30. You can still do it, all right? You still have time to do your prayers. It's only a half-hour show. And then that half-hour show becomes, at 10:30, another show comes. Hey, there's another show. You still have time to do it. Until before you know it, you're either sleeping on the couch or you are, watching another show and there's no more time because you're engrossed in it. You see, Satan just wants to waste your time. That's basically what he wants to do. Three things that, you got to understand. Satan just doesn't want you to cause you to sin, a direct sin, like, hit another person. He's okay with you just wasting your time and not doing what you're supposed to do, which might be your prayers, which might be taking care of your kids, which might be doing the chores that your wife has given you or your mom has given you, right? Because that's just as effective as doing something evil, right? So, and then the self basically succumbs to the passions and the idea of watching the TV, and then winds up wasting their time watching television and not doing the prayers. So that's a 2-1 punch. The TV, which is the worldly idea, is the jab. The knockout punch is the devil tempting you. And once you succumb to that, you will waste your time watching television instead of doing your prayers. Okay? So that's how you become lazy. That's how you become lack of drive. All right? So now, let's talk about the passions, because the passions are really where the drive comes from, okay? So if you were to look at our soul and see all of its capabilities and facilities that it can do, we understand that we have the upper area, which is the intellect and the will. We have our memory and our imaginations, and then we have our passions. And the passions are what I call the engine of the soul. It's what actually makes our bodies go, okay? So we're going to talk about this, all right? So the passions of our soul drives us to get things done. And there's 3 fuels for so before I talk about the 3 fuels, in essence, what the passion wants to do is that it's always going to perceive the good and avoid the evil, okay? That's what it's going to do, all right? It's going to basically go after the good and avoid the evil, all right? So that's how it works, all right? It's kind of like a 2-cycle engine. It basically says, I'm going to go after the good and avoid this evil. Now, keep in mind that the good and the evil can be perceived good and evil. It doesn't mean that it actually is good or evil. So many people can be misled thinking that the good is really evil and the evil is really good. That's what we're running into right now. That's why the truth is so important, because because the truth will say good is good and evil is evil. But the lie will say the good is evil and the evil is good. That's what's happening right now in our society. So keep in mind that the passion can also be dominated, or intellect and will can be misconceived here, right? It's perceived good or evil, and not sometimes always true good or true evil. So what's the fuel that drives our passions? Well, there's three fuels. Like gasoline drives an engine. If without that gasoline, that engine will not run, okay? And it won't. So there's three fuels. First is fear, okay? Fear is a fuel that fuels our passions. This is probably the most common, okay? So fear of losing a job, fear of not making things on time, fear that I might look bad, okay? Fear. And most, what we call lazy people will usually be the primary mover in the passions. The primary fuel will be fuel. It will be fear. It would be fear that does that. So the next and fear is honestly, fear does not last long. Not only does fear does not last long, fear eventually will wear down and cause people then to reject the good. Okay, so you can't last on fear. Okay. Because at the end of the day, fear becomes annoying and bothersome, and you will then, not want to work where it wants to. Okay. The next is anger. Okay. The next fuel is anger. And, it's amazing because when people say, "What do you think of the military?" I always tell people, that the military really trains us to be what we call controlled anger. That's basically what it is. Everything. Because the military knows anger is the primary mover to get things done. There's a lot of yelling and screaming and then in actual combat, eventually there will be anger, because if there isn't any anger, it's not going to, people aren't going to just move in doing that. So I would say in some sense it's controlled anger. If you watch war movies, they're always angry, Why do you think propaganda in movies want to make us think that we are the good guys, they're the bad guys, and it always things that anger, people. I remember there was a famous picture during World War I about the Huns rape women, So if you can get people angry, that's a primary mover. In fact, St. Augustine wrote, "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are." Now, that's St. Augustine that said that, okay? So he knew how much anger can motivate people to go. Now, this fuel also is not good for two reasons. One is it doesn't sustain, okay? Just like fear, it doesn't sustain. It's just, it'll sustain a little bit, but eventually people will be tired of it, right? You can't sustain anger. The second reason is because sometimes anger is misled and is wrong. And it can go overboard and do more damage than help. You can see a lot of war movies where there were atrocities. That's because the anger got miscontrolled and it wound up leading to innocent deaths. So the last fuel is love. Love is the only one that's freely chosen and freely goes after something. Now, the problem with love, okay, and the great thing about love is it is sustainable. Love is sustainable, okay, and it will sustain until the day we die. We talked about the power of love, because once we choose something, once we choose this perceived good is good, then they will do it, okay? But here's the problem with this one. It could be misled that love is misled to be lust, something that is reduced to our bodily pleasures. And that's what happens. And that's where true laziness comes into play. When lust gets involved. And lust doesn't mean here just sexual lust. Lust here means anything that's bodily. Okay, it could be gluttony. It could be a sense of luxury. It could be all that, because that's what happens. So when and actually that is probably predominantly the biggest issue, is when we choose the pleasure side, the easy side. Okay, that's really what it is, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So, all right, we talked about the energy, fear, anger, and love. Those are the three fuels for our passions. The next thing is how the passions are controlled. You see, the passions are not, an intellect or a will. It doesn't control itself. It just acts like an engine. Just like, if you were to get an engine in a car, engine doesn't drive the car. The steering wheel does, right? And it's the human being that controls it through the steering wheel and through the gas pedal and the brakes. That's what happens. All right. So the engine never controls anything. In fact, the engine just goes either revs up or revs down. Okay. The speed in which you go is going to be controlled by what gear you're on. Okay. And if you have the brakes on or not. Right. So the engine really is dumb. And it can't be controlled. So it's the same thing with our passions, okay? So who controls it, right? So the first thing is, the first control, okay, is when we allow our body and external senses to control our passions, all right? That would be like allow no one driving the car and the engine can just speed and do whatever it wants. It is a recipe for failure and for self-destruction. So this is basically what's happening, is our body and our external senses, okay, control the passions. So our passions are attached to the luxury, the pleasure, the lust of the world. And that's what it does. And when it does that, two outcomes occur. One is laziness, because a lot of times people, all they want to do is basically sleep and eat and sit down and rest. Animals do the same thing. Most animals don't want to really run around. They just want to sleep, eat, and maybe play every once in a while, okay? And procreate, right? So that's basically what you're allowing when you let your bodies do that, it's the same thing. It falls under the realm of lust. You might want to, drive you for lust issues, sex issues. Will drive you to get food. It'll drive you to get some sleep. But at the end of the day, you're really just letting your body take control of it, and you have no really drive to do anything other than that. So that's one way, is just letting it go and letting your passions do whatever it wants to do. And that's pretty common. That's really, really common, okay? Especially teenage kids will go over that, okay? The next is, in that category, a lot of times the senses will eventually, if it doesn't lead to laziness, it will eventually lead to a sense of escapism. That's what happens. People who are at this level, which most people are, will eventually lead to laziness, a sense of escapism. And escapism is drugs, alcohol, wanting to live alone. Even religion can be escapism. People escape to religion. I've seen many Catholics who escape to religion rather than religion actually healing them and then becoming holy by loving other neighbors. It becomes excusism. I call it instead of escapism is excusism. I always wanted to be a Marine. So many times I hear people, they come up to me like, "You're a Marine?" It's like, "Yes, I wanted to be a Marine." And it's like, then why didn't you? Not to be cold about it, but it's like, well, why didn't you? If you had a medical condition, I can see that. But, it's always what if, I wasn't sure. It's like, well, then you never wanted to be a Marine. Okay, move on. So, excusism, right? The second is way that we control our passion is through the intellect and the will. But it's misled by the world and the devil. This is where a lot of major sins occur, is when our intellect and our will are misled by the world and the devil. And it governs our passions, which leads to either fear and paralysis or myopic, in most cases, evil drive. So when the intellect and the will are misled by the world and the devil, it typically will lead to either fear, okay? There's so much fear, okay, there, that it then causes us to have paralysis, okay? Paralysis. Or it will lead us to do evil actions, because the world then flips the good with the evil and the evil with the good, okay? So that's what happens. Then our passions are used for evil purposes. And Satan did that through our intellect and the will. Remember, the passion doesn't have any brains. It doesn't know what it's doing. But it will implement whatever our intellect and our will decides. And if we're going to be misled, right, thinking that the good is evil and the evil is actually good, then the intellect and the will use the passions to drive for evil causes, okay? And that's where we're at. This is why the truth is so important, again, because if you don't have the truth, all right, then you're not going to be able to drive for good causes, okay? You know, a lot of times there's been this false idea that we have to follow our conscience, okay? And so there's been a lot of, you know, maybe priests or even lay members who are fairly famous at saying, I'm just following my conscience. I'm just following your conscience. Well, that's not true, okay? We don't follow our conscience, okay? We follow a well-informed conscience, okay? What does that mean? That means that our conscience is not inerrant, okay? Is not infallible, okay? All right? So we can actually be misled and choose the wrong thing. So what we have to understand is we have to follow our well-informed conscience, okay? And how do we get well-informed? Through the truths of the Catholic Church. That's how we do it. We base it off the truths of the Catholic Church, because anything less than that is, you know, tainted with error and falsehood, which will lead us to make the wrong drive, okay? So lastly, how we control it is with our intellect and will, but properly informed, which properly governs our passions and leads to holiness and action. This is key. To be properly informed, okay, and, you know, through our intellect, and then our will chooses the real good, not just the perceived good, but the real good, okay? And then allows the passions to go after the real good. So let's kind of, I know this was a lot, but let's kind of circle this around, right? So there's 4 elements that we have to worry about when it comes to drive. The first is the intellect. The second is the will. And the third is the passions, and the fourth is the external senses, okay? So if we were to kind of, they're all an interplay at this. The first is the external senses. The external senses allows, you know, we have to conquer our external senses. And what are the external senses? It's basically, you know, sight, taste, smell, hearing, and touch. You know, and all our external senses wants to do is it wants to seek the pleasure and avoid the pain, okay? That's what animals want to do. They just want to seek the pleasure and avoid the pain. And if we allow our external senses to control our passions, this is where lust and laziness gets into play, all right? And so we don't want to do that. We want our passions to control our external senses. That's what we want to do, okay? And not the other way around, all right? So the way that we do that, though, is we have to govern our passions, okay, through the intellect and the will. So the intellect basically perceives, okay, the good and the evil. So that's why a well-informed conscience, a well-informed intellect is important. The truth is important, because then the intellect can say, this is the real good. This is the real good, not the perceived good, but the real good, you know. Now, the will then chooses it and says, I want that good. And then it hands it off to the passions to go and execute and get it done. And that means that the passions have to override our external senses, because our external senses might say, whoa, that perceived good is going to put my life in jeopardy or is scary, okay? That's what it is. So, for example, if the intellect says, I truly believe that heaven exists and that I want to go to heaven, that's the will, I want to go to heaven, okay? Then I have to defend the faith, okay? And so the passions take control of it and starts, evangelizing to people. And there are people who might not want to be evangelized and start, yelling and screaming at you, right? And our external senses are saying, oh, well, I don't like being yelled at. I don't like to hear people, angry at me. I don't like people hitting me, or threats given to me, right? So the passions control those external senses. So that's what happens. So the passions drive everything. It executes everything that the intellect and the will does. Now, where does the issue come into play is the fact that, if we only leave it at the intellect and not freely will that, then we just intellectualize things, So all of these components need to be orderly, okay? The order is intellect, will, passions, external senses. That's kind of like the hierarchy, right? And it shouldn't go the other way around. It can't be external senses at the top, right? So the intellect is important first, then the will chooses it, and the passions implement it, and it controls the external senses so that it won't. Our body doesn't confuse what our decision is. So that's the important thing. So what's the paradigm shift here? We need to have a properly formed intellect which presents the true good to the will, and the will to choose the good, so that the passions can be governed by the intellect and the will, causing us to drive for the good. This will allow our bodies to conform and drive towards the good, regardless of the pain or suffering it will be accustomed to. So that's what happens, okay? So let's talk about how we can do that, right? First is, what we got to do is we have to sanctify the mind, okay? We call it sanctification of the mind. That means we have to do two things. One is holy ignorance, which is not letting evil things enter our soul. The way that they do that is through sights. Sight is 80% of evil things come through our sight. So sight through sound, music, those types of things, conversations, all right? And when I say evil things, it could be ideological thoughts. It could be, religious, erroneous religious thoughts. It could be movies. It could be television shows that promote all of that. So one is by holy ignorance, not allowing these things to be there, right? I don't watch television. I rarely listen to music. If it is, I do listen to music. It's usually religious music. I don't read books other than, religious books or things that I need minimally to do my job. Even certain entrepreneurship books, Good to Great and, these other ones that are out there, I don't read because at the end of the day, they're all about manipulation. So, I try not to do that. Conversely, we should be reading religious books on the truths of the Catholic Church, because that's what will really distinguish the difference between good and evil. Because remember, the world and the devil want to flip it. They want to say that the good is evil and the evil is good, because they know that you're going to always shoot for the good, or what we call the perceived good. Okay. But you can't just shoot after the perceived good. You have to shoot after the real good, which only the Catholic Church and its teachings will know. Everything else is tainted, okay? So that's how we sanctify our mind, okay? So I'll give you a couple examples, right? The worldly success shifts from godly success when we do this, all right? So instead of chasing after worldly success, okay, that's what Hitler tried to do, we shift to godly success. That's what St. Francis went after, all right? Instead of seeking worldly perfection, we shift to spiritual perfection. You know, this is the Pharisee story, right? The Pharisees made sure that everything was in line, right? That's what Jesus was saying. He was saying, hey guys, you think you have it all, but you're basically whitewashed tombs. You look pretty on the outside, but you're ugly in the inside. The inside is the spiritual perfection. The outside is the worldly perfection. I'd rather look ugly on the outside, but beautifully in the inside. So that's the difference between worldly perfection to spiritual perfection, okay? St. Francis looked like, a ragged old man at the age of 42, right? His habit that he was wearing was just raggedy, okay? Wearing a cord and this, clothes. But he was not perfect on the outside, but he was perfect on the inside, okay? So, worldly glory versus heavenly glory, right? That's what Hitler tried to do. He tried to seek worldly glory. He wanted to be the top of the world, but it was destroyed. But St. Francis went and did heavenly glory. I explained a lot of that in my episode 2, where I compare St. Francis with Hitler. The second thing that we can do to sanctify the mind is the ability to zoom out, think at a higher level. A lot of times we actually act and think myopically. That's what we do, okay? We basically think myopically, and we just do the tasks. And that's not what you got to do. You got to zoom out. I call this disconnecting the task with the overall mission, okay? That happens so many times when people just do the task without really realizing, well, what is this all for? Why am I doing this task? It's like if I told a guy, I say, dig a hole, and they start digging holes all over the place, and then I come back and I say, well, guys, I was making a fence. I don't know why you were just digging holes. Well, you told us to dig holes, right? So a lot of times we do these tasks without thinking, what's the overall goal? Why are we doing this? Okay? So when we disconnect the tasks, just like we're in Lenten season right now. People are offering Lenten sacrifices and they don't even know why. Why am I doing this? Okay? I bet you if you polled the average Catholic, they wouldn't know why. Okay? And so when you disconnect that, then it really doesn't help out, because then your actions seem fruitless, seem worthless, seem like they're not worth anything. And then lastly, within the sanctification of the mind is seek to become something, not to go somewhere. I tell people, don't shoot to go to heaven. Whatever you do, don't shoot to go to heaven, right? It sounds shocking, right? Because what happens is people think that going to heaven is a set of steps and rules to get there, right? If I do this and if I do that, then I must be going to heaven, right? But heaven is not a place for people for a recipe, okay? Like a formula, all right? So heaven is a place for saints. So what you want to shoot for is to be as a saint. As St. Therese said, I want to be a saint. All right? It's being something, like I want to be a Marine, or I want to be an entrepreneur, okay? Or I want to be a businessman or woman. It's being something, because when you are being something, then you're shooting to change your life, to change who you are, okay? You can't be an entrepreneur and think like, if I do, it's kind of like babysitters, right? I remember I was talking to this one woman that we knew, and she says, I can't wait to be a mother. I used to babysit, and so I'm going to be the perfect mother. Well, she wound up having kids, and she wasn't the perfect mother. All right. And I kept warning her. I said, just because you did certain tasks that mimic what it means to be a mother doesn't mean that you're ready to be a mother. And there's a big difference. There is a big difference. Just because a babysitter will never be a mother, right? And, so once you become a mother, you will do everything that a babysitter does, though, okay? So, you stop focusing on the task and you focus on changing who you are, All right. So that's the next thing. So that's all underneath the category of, first sanctifying the mind, this mentality of what we have, right? The next thing we got to do is sanctify the heart, okay? And the way that we do that is stop acting like a robot, okay? Or like an animal, and following our external senses, okay? We have to start a deep prayer and meditation, okay? The Catechism of the Catholic Church states that it's through prayer and meditation that makes our knowing of God real and alive. That's what it does, okay? And without making that real and alive, then it's just a sterile ideological thought, okay? Muslims and Jews and pagans can study all they want about Jesus and glean some good, phrases that he said, okay? But at the end of the day, they don't have a relationship with Jesus, and it won't move them to the faith. Catholics is the same thing. If you're a Catholic and you're not praying and meditating, that's key, the word meditation, then honestly, you're probably no better than a person who's a Muslim who knows about Jesus, or a pagan who knows about Jesus, because you're not having a deep relationship with him. And that's why meditation is important. There's a theological idea, and I believe the Franciscans believe this, is that you cannot go to heaven, okay, without meditation. Without meditation, okay? I don't care if you go to daily mass every day. I don't care if you, go to confession every other day. If you don't meditate and bring Jesus in there, then all those actions are meaningless, okay? Because you're not making Jesus real, and it's not sustainable, okay? So so that's what we do. We sanctify the heart through meditation. It's the liquid Drano from the head to the heart, okay? And then the third thing we do is we allow the passions to go, okay? This is important. So intellect is the first thing. If you don't have the intellect correct, you're going to be misled, okay? And if you're misled, then you might worst case scenario is you're going to do some really, evil acts. Best case scenario, you're just going to be lazy, okay? The second is sanctifying the heart. That's where we're going to really choose, and it's going to grow and love and have a relationship. And the third is allowing our passions just to do it. And I have a phrase, it's called just do it with Jesus. Because what's going to happen is our passions are going to have to fight the external senses. And a lot of things that we have to do, our external senses are going to say, I don't want to do it. I don't want to wake up at, 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm a tertiary, so I'm mandated to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's not the easiest thing to do, or I have to do my prayers. And the external sense is saying, I don't want to do my prayers. I just want to sit and eat, or I want to sit and watch this television. Okay. Or I want to watch, so it's, you're going to have a constant battle. So you got to allow it to do it. So, just to do it. So let's talk about real quickly the passion. If we look at the passion, this exemplifies everything. Jesus intellectually assents to his death, and then he wills the death. Father, not my will, but thy will be done. And then the whole scene of him getting executed is his passion. That's why it's called the passion of our Lord Jesus Christ. Okay? Because he's now allowing our passions to go, regardless of what the pain he has to suffer through his body. His passion overcomes it. But why? How? Because he intellectually knows what the good is, okay, which is bringing salvation to humanity. He then wills that, not my will, but thy will be done. And then he uses the intellect and will to control those passions to go and do what it needs to do. And that is to overcome the pain and the suffering in his body to be crucified and tortured. Okay? So, best thing for this category is to do things with joy, do the virtues, okay? Figure out how things can be done and not why it can be done, okay? So let the passions go. So bottom line, increasing drive can only occur if we freely choose the true good from the intellect and is chosen by the will. which will then govern the passion and control our external senses in our bodies, even in fearful, painful situations. Okay? The Catholic Church's teaching on the will and the intellect helps us to understand that we can control our lives by governing our passions and using it to drive to holy success. God actually does not micromanage our lives because love does not micromanage. Love leads and coaxes and mentors. We need to use our intellect, will, and passions for God, and many times it will lead us to holy success. I leave you with one thing here with a little thing about Mother Teresa of Calcutta. You know, Mother Teresa's first year in the slums was particularly hard. She was used to a life of comparative comfort, and now she had no income and no way to obtain food and supplies other than begging. She was often tempted to return to the convent life and had to rely on her determination and faith to get herself through it. All right? So that's Mother Teresa of Calcutta. All right? So let's end it with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord Jesus, help us to be well informed, to seek the good, the true good, to will it, and to implement it through our passions. Your Son went through the passion and suffering. Let us do the same as we pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease, at Practical Catholic. Here's a reflection for you. Take a moment and reflect, what do I really like or love that makes me motivated to do something? Feel free to share your reflection or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com. Join me next week as we discuss drive and what happens when we have too much, or what we would call myopic drive.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom